Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dave Deshane. I'm the Executive Director of the USA Triathlon Foundation, coming to you from Colorado Springs. We are still in an environment due to COVID where we're still partially working from the office and partially working remotely. It's later in the afternoon today after business hours, so I'm at home. You're joining me in my dining room this evening. And we're here to talk about our second author speaker series and introduce Christine Wodke, the author of Running for My Life, Life with CMT and Winning for CMT. Christine is an ambassador of the USA Triathlon Foundation as well, a great athlete, and you'll learn more about her story this evening. But before we dive in and provide you all with the opportunity to meet Christine, let me share with you a little bit about the USA Triathlon Foundation. The USAT Foundation is the charitable arm of USAT, and as you all know, USAT is the governing body of the sport of triathlon. Our primary mission is to transform lives through sport by providing opportunities to swim, bike, and run. We all have vivid memories from our childhood when we were running around the neighborhood, jumping in the pool, riding our bicycles. We did a triathlon essentially every day. And we all know the benefits of triathlon and leading a healthy lifestyle and how that creates the opportunity for us to be lifelong athletes. And it's a great opportunity there. We focus primarily on supporting three distinct pillars of our sport and getting people acclimated to the sport through these pillars. We encourage youth participation. We want kids to lead a more active and healthy lifestyle. We work with physically challenged and adaptive athletes to provide them with the opportunity to experience swimming, biking, and running sports as well. And last and certainly not least, and it's quite prevalent these days in the news and the media with just about 60 days before the Olympics and the Paralympics kick off, we hope to ignite the dreams of our up and coming elite level athletes, our Olympic and Paralympic hopefuls down the road. Christine has been a big supporter of the foundation over the last couple of years. And coincidentally, last year in the pandemic year itself, we had 3 folks affiliated with our foundation ambassador program or our board of trustees who became authors. And it's quite strange to have one group of people all have 3 authors resonate in one year. Earlier in the year, you heard the story of Sue Reynolds, her story and her journey of becoming a triathlete from being morbidly obese to becoming a world champion. And today you're going to hear Christine's story of her challenge and her journey of dealing with a disease known as CMT. It's the Charcot-Marie-Tooth disease. So without any further delay, let me introduce you to Christine Wodke. Christine hails from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, the home of Age Group Nationals this year. Christine, tell us a little bit about yourself, and we'll dive into the book after that.
I'm an athlete, got my athletic start as a runner and transitioned into doing triathlon because my body could not take running every day. So I started swimming and biking to relieve the pressure of running. And one day I thought, well, I might as well do a triathlon. And that's how I got my start in triathlon. It was a little bit of a shaky start at first, but I've been an athlete for years, since college. And I retired 2 weeks ago, so it's been a pretty long career.
Well, congratulations on your retirement.
Thank you.
I think many of us have got started in triathlon on a whim or a bet or a challenge along the way. So it's not surprising to hear that was part of your story. So Christine authored this book primarily as a way to create awareness of CMT. A very unknown disease. If you were to ask anybody in the general public what CMT is, I would venture to guess that the vast majority of people are not aware of what that disease is. Christine, tell us a little bit about the disease and how many people are affected by this.
So we call CMT the biggest disease no one has ever heard of because there are over 170,000 Americans affected. That's about as many as MS. But for some reason, it is so unknown. It's the largest genetic disease, neurological disease. There is, in my case, a gene that overproduces a protein that causes the lining around my nerves to break down. And because the electric signal can't get down the nerve, the muscles start to weaken and atrophy. So there are people with CMT have balance issues, fatigue, muscle weakness, so your muscles start to wither away. Lots of people with CMT have difficulty walking, they wear braces. Fine motor control is very difficult, handwriting, opening doors, buttoning buttons. A whole host of other things can also occur. It's highly variable disease, even within families in terms of severity. Hearing loss is one thing that I have with this condition. Breathing difficulties are quite common. Perception in space. So we bump into a lot of things. Lots of trips and falls. Catching my foot when I'm running is quite a common occurrence. Lots of injuries as an athlete. Lots of injuries.
So Christine, I would assume that with all of these symptoms associated with disease, it has been somewhat of a challenge to be an athlete.
It was, especially since I wasn't diagnosed until I was in my 40s. So especially when I first was training for marathons back in the mid 90s, I had got a stress fracture the first time I trained for a marathon, and the physical therapists or the doctors would look at my legs and they couldn't understand why my calf muscles were so tight, which is the classic symptom of CMT. And I had really high arches and plateaus, but I've always been clumsy as a kid, had problems with handwriting as a child, gym class was horrible, and I didn't participate in organized sports for the most part growing up because I just wasn't a very good athlete compared to my peers.
So really, until you were 40 years old, you really didn't know that there were any physical limitations that you had. You just assumed that you didn't do well in penmanship and athletics wasn't your flavor. However, you did seem to excel in it. Would you say that's an accurate statement?
As an adult, yes. As a child, no, but I worked very hard as an adult and became a really good age group runner. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know what. You know, as an athlete, you kind of know when something's not right with your body. And I had a bike accident. A car opened its door and I hit it and I ended up in the hospital for 2 days and I had amnesia. So part of the follow-up was with a neurologist, and he determined I had no reflexes and he knew something was neurologically wrong, but he was scaring me with the tests. He was testing for ALS and some really ugly stuff. And I finally stopped going because a friend said to me, well, do you really want to know if it's something that's really not going to affect you much till middle age? And I thought, well, maybe I don't. And then my dad, when he retired, could no longer walk upstairs in his house. So he built a bedroom in his first floor. And he had no feeling in his feet. And he said, oh yeah, the neurologist said I have a genetic nerve disorder, but don't worry what it's called because there's no treatment and there's no cure. So I'm like, okay, so I have whatever my dad has and his sister has it.
So now you're starting to put the pieces together.
And then one day I got an email from my sister saying, 2 of my girls have CMT. So they were genetically diagnosed. So I looked it up and looked at the symptoms and said, this is what I have. And then I got my own diagnosis and I was about 43. So it was good to know. I was actually excited to know what it was.
Very good. Very good. It was good that you found out eventually, although it was probably a little bit frustrating that, you know, your dad knew about this, but hadn't shared that with you previously.
It's not uncommon. It takes the average CMT patient about 7 years to get a diagnosis.
Wow. That's a little alarming. Well, it's interesting that you had mentioned that you got into the sport of triathlon for cross-training purposes because you couldn't handle the running every day, and that a bicycle accident was really the catalyst for you to kind of go through the testing and for you to realize that, oh, maybe there is something wrong here beyond just normal coordination issues or muscle tightness along the way.
Right.
Yep. Yeah. So one of the stories in your book along the way was about a couple of different coaches. One of the coaches early on that you started working with, prescribed you running on a daily basis and did this consistently after you had mentioned to them, hey, I can't tolerate running every day. I need some cross training in there. And you figured it out pretty quickly. And a few weeks after working with that coach, you're like, time for a new coach.
Yeah,
I'm going to reach out and find a USA Triathlon certified level 1 coach who has been a long time coach for you. Tell us a little bit about Joy and how that relationship helped you succeed as an athlete.
Joy doesn't coach me any longer because she went back to school to become an assistant physical therapist. But she coached me for a couple of years, and I found her online because she also has CMT. And we don't have the same type. There's 23 different types, but it was an instant bonding because I found someone who gets me. And it was very much a collaborative effort. A lot of times I would come up with what I thought the workout would be, and I'd run it past Joy. And then we talk about just a lot of things, psychologically, and she'd answer my questions about setting up transition for a race. I was really fairly new at competing, and so I had 1,000 questions. So she was really good at answering my questions, and she was one of my coaches when I ran Boston. I think the first 2 years, she was my coach. So she was the first person who called me when I got back to the hotel to make sure I was okay.
So communication, understanding the athlete was a critical part to your.
It was huge. And we didn't even meet for years. We did it all by email. And I finally got to meet her at she was helping with classification at Cap Tex.
Okay.
When Paris Nationals were there. So I got to meet her finally. And
fantastic.
raced with her in Miami as well. Yeah. So it just was an instant bond between
Very
us.
cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. It was cool that you were able to have that virtual relationship from afar. And this was several years ago before we were all forced into this virtual.
Right.
So good for you being cutting edge back in the day. Well, we can see behind you the hardware that's on your wall, kind of your wall of fame back there.
Right.
And probably one of the strongest themes in the book is your journey as a runner. You've always been a runner. Why did running appeal to you?
Well, running was easy. So I started as an athlete, as a skier. I had a crush on somebody in college who was the guy.
I was going to say, tell us the story about why you became a skier.
I was an engineering student. He was an engineering student, and he was a really good athlete. And I was in a sorority and a little sister to this fraternity, engineering fraternity. And some of my fraternity brothers said, hey, we're going skiing at a local hill. Do you want to come? And, we'll teach you how to ski. Well, it was the first sort of day of the season, and they dumped me on the bunny hill with another one of my friends and took off. But I was determined to become a good skier because this guy I liked was a good skier. And I eventually, it takes a long time for me to learn anything, but I became a really good skier, and I took up running to help me become a better skier. And a roommate of mine after college, she and her fiance were entering races, and I came along with them one time, and I won a ribbon, I think 10th place in my age group, and I was hooked. And, running is something you can do anywhere. So I've been a runner basically since my college days.
Fantastic. And you've had the opportunity to run the holy grail of running, the Boston Marathon.
Yes.
On several occasions. And that's really the story in your journey, and where you kind of tell some of the challenges, some of the frustrations along the way. And early on, when you became a runner, you instantly set a goal of running the Boston Marathon, even before you were diagnosed with CMT.
Right.
Why was Boston such an iconic place for you to run?
Because it's like the Super Bowl of running. I think any serious runner aspires. And my very first marathon, I missed by 10 minutes, and that's the closest I ever got. I did 4 marathons until my bike accident, and then I was much slower and stopped running long distance and didn't race. My feet were burning. I couldn't understand why I was so slow, but I kept running because I liked the running part. I just didn't like how I had changed as an athlete and the frustrations that were due to my CMT that I didn't know were due to my CMT. So in my first athletic life, I didn't make that goal of running Boston. I just
Making the qualifying standard.
making the qualifying standard, right.
So really, as a result of your diagnosis, that gave you the opportunity to go and run Boston. Tell us a little bit about that process and how you got into Boston,
Sure.
the mobility impaired athlete.
Right. When I was diagnosed, I realized that I am really lucky because my CMT is, despite the challenges I have, really mild. I have nieces that are supposed to be wearing braces to walk. Lots of people would only dream of running. It's not super common with CMT. So I remember sitting in the doctor's office thinking, I'm going to run Boston because I can't believe I have a disease I've never heard of. And that has got to change. And I didn't know how I was going to get in. I had no idea. I just set this goal and had no idea how I was going to get there. I hadn't run a marathon in probably 10 years. I didn't even know if I could still run a marathon. And that started the journey, the trying to figure out how I was going to get in. And there was lots of ways to get into Boston without making the athlete time standard. And one day when I was checking the results of a friend of mine, I stumbled upon the mobility impaired results and then learned that I fit into that category and set about working with the Boston Athletic Association about what I needed to do to certify my impairment and what time I needed. And then I had to run a qualifying time. There's still a qualification standard for mobility impaired runners, and it's quite tight for someone with CMT. We've had 3 athletes that I know of make the time standard, and it's pretty tight for most people with the condition. So it's still an accomplishment for an impaired athlete to run Boston.
So as part of the journey, you went ahead and created a team.
Yes.
And created that fundraising program to create awareness for the organization. How did it feel on race day, that first time in Boston, wearing the CMT uniform or the CMT kit as you ran that course? What did that mean to you?
It was actually a lot of pressure because there had been a bit of media, TV, articles in magazines, radio, and the whole CMT community knew because there had been articles in the CMT advocacy sites, and it was 90 degrees. It was really hot. And I felt like I was representing the entire CMT community. So I felt a lot of pressure. And there was potential to fail because it was so hot. And so I really felt that. I was really glad when I crossed that finish line because it was a brutally hot day. It was tough. It was a really tough day, but it was a very proud day. I was really happy to represent the community and glad I was able to cross that finish line for them because I don't race just for me. I race for the whole community.
And through that media awareness that was generated, were you guys able to expand your team? Did you have different outreach that reached across the country, across the world? What was that like?
We have expanded the team. I don't know if it's just because of Boston, but we started with my same college friend who got me into running, the 2 of us, and we've got over 200 people now that have said I'm part of the team now. Are they all super active? No, but we have people that are active. We've had another runner complete Boston in 14. Got a number of Ironman athletes. with CMT. So, and there are people who can't run, but they cycle, or they swim, or they walk, or they do spin, or so our reach is actually fairly far. We're in 39 states, and I want to say about 10 countries overseas right now.
That's great. Congratulations. So as part of the process, you had to apply to Boston to be an adaptive athlete.
Yes.
When I look at you, you don't look like an adaptive athlete. And in fact, some of your coaches and some of your colleagues, kind of contested your impairment along the way. And in fact, one of the colleagues that you work with, in fact, called you a scammer. Tell us a little bit about the battle of how it is being an adaptive athlete who looks unimpaired, for lack of a better term. You're not missing an arm, you're not missing a leg, you're not visually impaired. So from the outside looking at you, what's wrong with you? How challenging is that as an athlete with an impairment who doesn't have that visual impairment?
I constantly am explaining to people that I have an invisible impairment. I went to the Hartford Ski Clinic a couple years ago, and when I signed in at registration, I told the coach, look, I have CMT. I know I don't look impaired, but I really do. I constantly say it to other para-triathletes. I lined up at Do Nationals last month, and I said to both the guys, I have CMT. I don't look impaired, but it's a neurological condition. I have seen athletes look me up and down at para events trying to figure out what I'm doing there. I had somebody turn to me at a swim start and say, the swim start's only for para athletes. I said, I know. Are you a coach? No, I'm an athlete. I was at Para Nationals last month. So I get it from the para community, and I got it at work that one day because I told a coworker, yeah, I'm trying to get into Boston as a mobility impaired runner. And he said, there's nothing wrong with you. You're a scammer. Right to my face.
So what was your response to that coworker?
I think I was a little bit flabbergasted. He told me later when I talked to him about it, he said, well, I don't think you're a scammer anymore. Because I had done a TV interview and I think he had seen it. And I think after that, he better understood. But part of the reason to be an athlete at these events is to help people understand there's a lot of private battles that people fight, and there are a lot of impairments that aren't readily visible. MS, CP, depression, diabetes. There's lots of things that people battle that you can't see. You don't know what kind of private battle somebody's fighting, so you shouldn't judge.
Certainly a challenge, and it's unfortunate that it took you being in the media and having your story told publicly for your coworker to come around.
Right.
But he came around and was an advocate for you after that.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, and as challenging and as frustrating as that sounds, that's really why you're doing what you're doing, isn't it? To create awareness.
Exactly, because that experience is not uncommon of people with CMT. They'll hear all the time, you look perfectly fine. And people don't understand that you have challenges because you look fine. And some people, it's very obvious, they wear braces or they walk with a really affected gait. But even somebody who isn't visibly affected has issues from this condition. And so to say to someone, you look perfectly fine, you don't know the things that somebody struggles with on a daily basis when you have a condition like this.
Right. Would you say that being an athlete and being active over these last, several years has helped your diagnosis and limited the symptoms associated with CMT?
Absolutely. I've been active since I was a little kid. Even though I wasn't in organized sports, I had 5 brothers and a sister, and we always played softball and volleyball and played tag and rode our bikes around because it was just fun. Competitive sports were not fun because I was so slow and so little. I'm just like 5'2". So yes, there have actually been studies that have been done that show exercise does improve symptoms, and it's thought it can slow progression. And that's an important message that the community needed to hear, because people with CMT were once told to go home, don't do anything, just go and sit on your couch because you're going to burn out your muscles. And I still hear that sometimes in the community, oh, exercise is bad for you. And one of the really important messages that I try to bring in the team CMT members bring, is that yes, you can be active and you can have a really full life, even with having CMT, and exercise is a really important part of that. And for me, competing is an important part of that, because it gives me the motivation to work out when I have that race coming up.
That's great. How did you handle last year, knowing that, everything was put on hold? Did you find that more challenging as an athlete, maybe not having a race?
In some ways, I raced twice. I snuck over to Michigan because they were doing some COVID safe races, 3 disciplines.
Great.
And it was really a good experience. It was great to be racing. I really missed national. And I stayed pretty motivated until starting to get into spring, because it was looking like stuff might not happen this year either. And my motivation was starting to lag just emotionally. I always kept working out. And now I did do nationals, so I'm back in it now, and I've got a race coming up in a couple weeks at Pleasant Prairie. So having the race is really important to me. It may not be for other people, but we got to get out there, because if not, you're going to be hurting on race day.
Yeah, I think this doesn't have anything to do with CMT, but I think it speaks to you as an athlete. In 2012, you ran the Boston Marathon with oppressive heat, 90 degrees. People may or may not know that it typically takes place on the second or the third Monday in April. So in Boston, the weather it could be a snowstorm, or it could be a heat wave, or anything in between. And you ran under one of the most adverse conditions that there was that year. The following year, 2013, was unfortunately probably the most infamous year of the Boston Marathon's history, with the bombing that took place there. Tell us about your experience running that day and when the race was halted for you. Talk us through. I raced that year as well, so I'm very interested in hearing your experience.
The first Boston I did was for the CMT community, and I talked about all the pressure that I felt. So going into the next year, I said to myself, I'm not doing any media. This race is for me. I want to enjoy the experience and absorb what it's like to go through Boston and not have all that pressure. So because I'd forgotten my nutrition, I was so much paying attention to the crowds and interacting with the crowds and really enjoying the experience. And I had guides that ran with me, and we changed at about the halfway point. So my friend who got me into running picked me up at about mile 14. And we were running together, and she had her phone, and all of a sudden we were at Boston College, and it blew up with text messages. And she said, oh, there's an explosion by the finish line. And I worked for a public utility at the time, thinking, well, that could be a transformer underground. I didn't think it was any big deal. And all of a sudden her phone started blowing up with text messages. Are you okay? And her fiance, who had done the first half of the course with me, was texting her, and I said, you've got to stop and answer those, because people are worried about us. So she did a couple of quick answers, and we carried on. And when you get to the Citgo sign, you're almost there. And we could see the turn on Boylston, and there was a barricade with the police saying, the race is over. And that was it, no explanation. And so we thought, oh, they're just being overly cautious about that explosion. So we tried to run on the side streets and cut in and finish, because we had had a similar experience with the race here in Milwaukee. It was called because of heat, and they said, oh, you're done, you're done. Well, we kept running, and we crossed the finish line because we were okay on a day when a lot of people were having trouble with the heat. So we just thought, oh, they're just being overly cautious. We'll just go down a side block and cut in. little did we know the chaos that was going on at the finish. But we got a taste of it when we went to go pick up our stuff that we had checked, because the bus was just like a mess of just packets all over the place because they had moved the bus. And the volunteer was so great. She just dug and dug and dug till she found her stuff. And I fortunately was staying right by the Charles River, so I was able to get to my hotel. Other people were near the finish line and they couldn't get to their hotels. But I got to the hotel and then my cell phone was full of texts, "Are you okay?" Including a friend of mine who lives in Concord saying, "Do you need me to come and get you? You know, if you can't get in your hotel, I'll come and get you." And I spent a couple of hours answering texts and posting on Facebook. And the local running club said, "Hey, how are our runners?" Meaning our Badgerland Striders member, everybody check in. So I typed a message that said, "I was on mile 20 when the bombs went off, I'm okay. I wasn't anywhere near danger." And then I got instant message from Wisconsin Public Radio saying, "Can I do an interview?" And I probably did 3 or 4 interviews, including a TV crew meeting me at the airport when I came home. So for a race where I wasn't intending to do any media, I did quite a bit of media, including some articles that I published after about what it was like that day in the race and what it felt like after the race, because we were told not to go out because they didn't know if there were more bombs or not. And I needed to get something to eat. So I went to a little place down the street, and the first thing you'd ask any runner was, "Where were you?"
Right.
To a person, "Where were you? Where were you?" And you know, everybody had a story. A friend of ours was in the first aid tent when the bombs went off. You know, so you hear different stories. When we were getting our stuff from that bus that was such a mess, one of the women standing there and waiting was 100 yards from the finish line.
Wow.
So, you know, you'd hear other people's stories. And while we weren't close, I heard ambulance sirens until 9 o'clock at night because my hotel was right by Mass General. So it was really hard not to feel emotionally involved with what happened there because of all the good people I saw along that course, and they were all affected by that.
Well, and you and I had spoken about that before we started the call officially, is that there's nothing like Boston, because the people in Boston treat every runner like an elite level runner. The crowds are 10 people deep. On hot days, they're spraying you with hoses. On cold days, they're standing out there with blankets. There's nothing like the Boston crowd. Tell us what your thoughts are when you think of Boston and like that one memory.
I think of my hand being numb from giving so many high fives. I think of the scream tunnel at Wellesley, because when I went back the last time I ran it, I had the same guide run the entire race, and she hadn't experienced Wellesley. And you can hear the women screaming over a mile away. And I said to her,
Wellesley College is an all-women's college. Every young lady comes out and is standing on the street, cheering at the top of their lungs for every single runner. It's great.
You can, and they hold up signs, "Kiss me, I'm from wherever they're from," and I'm not kissing anyone, but lots of high fives. And, you know, I'd pretend like I can't hear you, and they'd scream even louder. And it's, the crowd is so much fun because they are interactive a lot of parts of the way. And if you take an orange from them, they get excited. Or, you know, I told the story the year of the bombing, I took a gummy bear from he looked like about a 4-year-old boy standing with his dad. And when I took it, he looked up at his dad and said, "She took my gummy bear," like I'm somebody. I'm like, "Kid, I'm nobody." But it was thrilling for me to see him so excited. And that's how the crowd is. There is no crowd like the Boston crowd. It's just hard to describe that experience, because they just embrace you as a runner, even before and after the race. If you wear your Boston jacket, you are a rock star. You go into a restaurant and they say, "Thank you for coming." The year after the bombing, people walked up to me in the airport, in the plane, and at baggage claim, because I was wearing my jacket, and said, "Thank you for coming back. This is what the city needs. Thank you for being here." And, you know, I get kind of teary-eyed even talking about it, because the people along that route are so invested in that race, and they're invested in you as a runner in that race. And it doesn't matter if they've been standing there all day. They cheer like you are the first person they have seen, like you're some elite runner. And it's really fun. And Boston's fun too, because celebrities run the race. Teddy Bruschi ran near me, and I know that because everybody was cheering for him. He's a New England Patriot football player. Doug Flutie lined up right next to me the last year I did it. And my guide, I said, "Look, that's Doug Flutie." And she's like, "Who's that?" I said, "Heidi Trophy." And I'd seen him play at Boston College. So he was right next to me, literally right next to me. So that's the fun thing with Boston too, is, it's a big deal to running.
It is. It's a big deal. It's definitely the Kona of the marathon world, for sure, for sure. So congratulations on multiple Boston Marathon finishes. Let's talk a little bit about your triathlon career. You race in the PC Open division, and you were a longtime runner who didn't have a lot of experience in triathlon when you started participating. In the book, you talk about several stories and snafus that happened along the way. Can you share some of those?
Yeah, my first couple triathlons did not go well. The swim is what always scared me. And, I started by doing a duathlon because that, just dips your toe in. But then I signed up for a local sprint try, and I couldn't keep my face in the water for some reason. I had very little experience open water swimming. That race was basically my first. I mean, I swam as a kid, but there's a big difference between swimming at Grandma's Lake and being in the midst of a race where it's all churning. And I absolutely panicked. I could not keep my face in the water. And I think I ended up backstroking and side stroking, and I got through it, but it wasn't pretty. And the first couple of races were like that until I put on my scuba wetsuit and tried a sprint race and went, wow, this is a totally different experience. And I learned a couple of tricks for keeping my face in the water, and got some open water swim practice and some coaching on my technique and things like that. But the swim mantra was really the big breakthrough for me.
Very good, very good. Well, Christine, did you ever think that you would be an author?
No, and I'm not really, I wrote a lot in my professional life. I guess maybe I knew there was a book in there somewhere, but I didn't have anything to write about. I've written lots of training materials and procedures, technical writing. I'm not sure what made me decide to write the book. I think it was after the bombing at Boston that I decided to start. I kept a blog of the whole journey. So the book is based on the blog that I kept. So I think I just decided, well, let's turn these blogs into a book as a vehicle for a little bit different audience to reach with the message.
Well, great. The book is called Running for My Life, Winning for CMT. You can get to it on Amazon.
Yes.
Just Christine Wodke, Wodke, or Running for My Life, and it will pop right up. A lot of 5-star reviews on that book. And it's a great journey. If you're a passionate athlete, whether you're a triathlete or a runner, you get to follow along Christine's journey. And she also talks a lot about her disease, about CMT, and the challenges that she faced along the way during her running career, as well as sharing some of the struggles that she still faces today in her triathlon career. So we're so happy that you're an author, Christine, sharing your story. We're glad that you represent the USA Triathlon Foundation. Thank you for all that you do to support the foundation and share our mission. Thanks for being a great athlete and an advocate for the sport, and for everything that you've done to share the plight of CMT and the athletes that are out there struggling with that. What would you like to say in closing?
I would like to say I am so appreciative of the USA Triathlon, because there is no other national organization that has the grassroots ability to compete as a physically challenged athlete. I can go to any sanctioned race, and if I need accommodations, and sometimes I've asked for them, get them and be scored as a physically challenged athlete. And as a physically challenged athlete, I can go to a national championship event and compete as a challenged athlete and still make the US team and represent my country at a world championship. I don't know of any sport right now, any governing body that is allowing a physically challenged athlete to do that. USA Triathlon has been way out ahead of other organizations in helping athletes with physical challenges.
Christine, what would you say to those who are newly diagnosed with CMT?
I would say don't let it stop you from doing whatever it is you want to do in life. Whatever that goal is, that you may not be able to run, and your goal might be something different than mine, but whatever it is that you want in life, don't be afraid to try to go for it.
Christine, thank you for your time tonight. Virtual followers, thank you for joining in and following along on Christine's story. Again, you can pick the book up on Amazon. Christine Wodke, W-O-D-K-E, Running for My Life, Winning for CMT. Earlier in our presentation this evening, I mentioned we had 3 authors. Sue Reynolds, Christine Wodke are our first 2 speakers that we're featuring. Our next speaker that we'll feature in the coming weeks is an amazing story as well, Melissa Stockwell. Christine had the opportunity to meet Melissa at
I did. She's out of Chicago, so I see Melissa fairly often at races. Yes, I was part of Dare to Try for a little bit.
Yep, Melissa Stockwell in 2016 is a bronze medalist at the Rio Paralympics and is working diligently to qualify for Tokyo 2020 Paralympics. So in the coming weeks, we'll hear from Melissa and her story and her book as well. So good evening, everybody. Have a great time over the summer in your races. Stay safe. Best of luck with the training. And again, Christine, thank you for everything you've done.
Thank you, Dave.